Thank you, dear Rector. And now I invite Mr. Orhan Yılmaz to the stage as the first chairman to start the symposium.
Sayın Rektör, değerli yöneticiler, değerli editörler ve özellikle sevgili gençler. Öncelikle çeviri nedeniyle gençler ve öğrenciler bulunduğu için hem Türkçe konuşuyorum hem de onlara da hitap etmek istiyorum. Şimdi biraz sonra sizlere konuşmalarını yapacak olan iki değerli bilim insanını, inanın ben 20 yıldır sadece sanal ortamda konuşmalarını ve soru ve yanıtlarını izleyerek daha sonra kendileriyle tanışıp belli oturumlarda birlikte olarak hayranlıkla izliyorum. Çok önemli bir şans. Edirne zaten yolculuk konusunda önemli mesafeler kat etmiş, önemli başarılar elde etmiş bir Trakya Üniversitesi. Bu nedenle tabii ki sizlere hitap ederken üniversiteyi bu konuma getiren başta rektörüm ve önceki rektörler ve dergiler konusunda da yine sevgili Cem Uzun'un başında bulunduğu bir editörler ordusu olduğunu biliyorum. Onların başarılarını da naçizane içinde bulunduğum Ulakbim'den gün gün izliyorum. Toplantı nedeniyle daha büyük başarılar elde edeceklerini biliyorum. Bu toplantının oluşmasında ve düzenlenmesinde sevgili gençleri görünce daha da mutlu oldum. O nedenle onlara da özel olarak teşekkür ediyorum. Ve zaman geçirmeden bilimsel oturumlara geçip sizleri bu bilim şölenine ortak etmek istiyorum. Öncelikle ilk konuşmacımız sevgili Ana Marusic. Sizi konuşmanız için davet ediyorum. Buyurun efendim.
Very nice to see you all here, and I would just like to thank the Rector and Partner University for hosting us here. This is just a small line that last year I was here in 2015 and enjoyed my time enormously to get to know editors from Edna and their passions and their work. So it's really my privilege to be here and to be a part of the community later on and more about and how we can be a part of a bigger community. So it is my real privilege to see, and I think that what we heard so far is also one of the answers to the question that there were two difficult questions for me. How to get out of how to get your perception. And one of the answers to this is to have good local journals and to have policy promoting and supporting journals and communication. I've been an editor for now almost 30 years. It's 28 years. And in fact, our journal in a very difficult time and we feel the same pressures as you are in the academic community, as our academic community is small, we are not visible in the world, and it's always a pressure and a challenge for us to publish in international journals. And this was one of the reasons why we started our journal. It's now 28 years ago. And that was because we wanted to show that there is good research, even in small academic communities. As you know, Croatia is also from the Balkans. We are a small country. I come, for example, from Mostar in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is even a smaller state, especially from a country, especially from an academic point of view. But we wanted to show that you can make a good journal in a small country. And this is the reason why we actually started the Croatian Medical Journal, which was the first journal that I was editor of. Because, you know, our colleagues usually said, oh, there is no way we can publish in good journals, you know, we cannot even dream of nature and science. And then also that we wanted a journal that would be kind of a door for a smaller academic community to go into the global scientific community. And our idea was, once you learn how to write for us, then you can go and write for any journal in the world and be successful to do good research. And also we wanted to be a window for the global community to see that there is good research even in small scientific communities that is worth of a global community that is contributing to global community. And this is the reason, actually, why we succeeded. And actually, our bad luck in having a terrible war for 5 years was also something that was really very useful for us to make a place in the scientific community, because we specialize in providing evidence about war-related medical issues, also about social issues of trauma in the society, societal changes, of the post-communist market transition in different countries and the effects on health. So even, you know, when you're not really in a good situation, you can turn this challenging situation for you into something that will make you special and that you can write about. So this is the message from me as a kind of a fellow member from a country that is not similar in a way of size. You know, Croatia is probably 1/5 of Istanbul, has only 4 million people. But when we look at the academic community and how visible we are in the global society, in the global scientific world, we are very small. And we have a challenge to fight and to be present on the world scene. So, this will be more kind of a experience of a long-term editor about how to go about publishing in high-impact journals. And of course, you know, there are so many questions related to this, so slides will serve only as a kind of a guidance for me what to tell about, because I just want to tell you about the experience that we have. And I have different messages for the authors, and I have different messages for the policymakers and teachers. And I will first start with the second one, for the policymakers and teachers. And actually, it's better to speak in here? Okay. And actually, so can I turn this off? If it is. Yeah. Okay, good. Better. Very good. And actually, you're going the right way. You have a university and rector and leadership of the university that is stimulating publishing of journals. They can be in local language, in your mother tongue, they can be international journals, but both are really valuable for the development of scientific community. So if there is anything that I can say to policymakers, is please continue to support local journals, because they are not only for publishing science, but they are also for educating and increasing the potential of a community, scientific community, to publish. So this is one thing. Journals are very important for a scientific community and professional community. You can have regional or national journals that are published in the local language, and you have international journals that are published in English, and both of them are important. Journals as English are important to teach your authors how to write, how to
kind of get through this first experience of writing and publishing a paper. And then I think then that there is a time that you can make a leap and publish in better journals. But also, national journals are important because they are kind of building up the profession in the country. And in many professions, and I know that here are not only medical journals, but that there are also people and researchers from other scientific fields. I come from medicine, and most of what we publish and what we read as medical professionals is in English. But then again, I always quote a saying from one of the editors-in-chief of JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, George Lundberg, who said, I once heard a previous editor that said, the language of science today is English, but the language of medicine is the language of patients that you treat. So there is a very important function of national journals because they support the profession, they provide terminology, because in medicine you cannot come and tell the patient, oh, you have a tumorous mass in the posterior aspect of your axilla, but you have to say it in terms that are understandable to the community. So national journals are very important because they can bring the knowledge and serve as the knowledge translators into the practice and serve community in that way and develop the terminology that we need to communicate what we do as a profession. So again, my message to the policy makers is to support journals, both those in English and those in a mother tongue, because they are really important for the development of science and research in a country. My message to the teachers of how to answer this question of getting published in high-impact journals is teach your students. I have spent my 25 years or 28 years of training students and training different levels of researchers in writing. When we started a journal in 1990, just before the war in Croatia, and then the war started on, and we collected evidence from the battlefields about the medical aspect of war. We saw that our colleagues on the front were really, did great things. They had really lots of knowledge, lots of great experiences, but they didn't have skills to write this. So we work with them. We work with them individually. We even published research that showed that those colleagues that we worked with as editors on one-to-one basis compared to their self-identified peers, so this was like a case control study. We looked at what happened with the colleagues that we helped and those that we didn't help, but that were at the same professional level, and we showed that the people that we helped really did better academically. So they published more papers, they became assistant professors sooner than the other ones. So you can do make a change if you're an editor. And then, but we saw that it wasn't enough, that you have to give education to a bigger group of authors. So we did workshops for authors of the Croatian medical journals, and we also showed, and this is something that is ongoing, so we're evaluating more than 10 years of experiences with these workshops, and we also show that we significantly increased the number of publications in the Web of Science and in PubMed, because for medicine, PubMed is one of the databases that is very important, and that the persons who are not attending these workshops need 5 to 8 years to catch up with these people. So it really works to educate people. And then we said, okay, this is good, but we're still reaching a very small number of authors, and then we also saw that, you teach them once and they come again with the same problems with their articles, and that was frustrating for us as journal editors. So what we did, we said, okay, let's do it in a public health way. It's better to prevent. It's better to teach future researchers about writing, about communicating, about doing research. So we introduced, and we really had a very good support from our school. It was then at the University of Zagreb in Croatia, and we introduced a mandatory course for medical students at their undergraduate level, that they learn about how to do research, you know, the basics of study design. It's also evidence-based medicine for medical students, and also how to communicate the results of scientific research to different audiences. So this became a mandatory course, which kind of leads into evidence-based medicine courses, and then it was accepted by other universities in Croatia. And in this way, we are actually preparing the future generation of authors who have skills in writing and communicating research, understanding research, because when you teach writing, when you teach about scientific articles, you don't teach only about how to write it, but also how to critically assess any information that you have as a professional or a citizen, in order that you make a good assessment of what you read and what you have as evidence, and then be able to use it in a different way. So my message to the colleagues, teacher, and to the university is think of this. Don't let it happen too late. The sooner you come, and if critical assessment and writing becomes a part of a professional development, so if it becomes a part of the undergraduate education, then you will be successful in generating good authors, good future authors, because, you know, by writing a diploma thesis or their master thesis, you will already achieve something that is very important. They know how to write well, that they write their own ideas and own research, and not to copy something from the internet. So this is something that is very important. So now I come to the authors. My answer to the question of how to get published in high impact factor is just to say I come from a country. I don't have to say I come from a country that has nice sea. I can say I come from a country that has Luka Modric. You all know who Luka Modric is. He received a golden ball last night, and he now has all the awards in football. And he's a little boy who really was a refugee during the war. Some of his family members were killed during the war, and he lived for 8 years as a refugee in a hotel near Zadar. And look at him now. So this is the answer, my answer to the authors. You really have to work hard for many years to be able to publish in a really good journal. And when I asked Jen, so what do you mean by high-impact journal? He said, oh, we don't have enough publications in science and nature. Science and nature are a dream for everybody, not only of us in small countries. Many researchers, most of the researchers, 95% probably, of the researchers in the whole global community, scientific community, will never publish in Nature and Science. Because it's such an exclusive community, it is really a only for the frontiers of science, and it's really very rare for anybody in the world to publish there. I have a publication in Nature, but it is a part of and I don't consider it as kind of my own research, because it was a big global effort on doing some genetic analysis and trying to link genes with diseases or some other characteristics of humans, where we contributed our sample from Croatia to a big consortium of people that were doing genome-wide analysis scans. So we do have a number of papers in Nature. But that was, I consider it more of a kind of an accident and not something that I or my group produced. We were just part of a bigger effort. But that's also very important and very good. I will talk more about how to publish and what are the things that determine that your paper will be published in the next presentation. But here I just want to say, don't look too high, because then you don't see what is under the stars, and you don't see the ladders, how you can come to the star or publishing in Nature or Science or a big journal. There are different journals, and they vary a lot, and especially when we talk about impact factor, maybe that will be something for the tomorrow's agenda when we talk with editors. Nowadays in the world, impact factor is considered by many people that it's not the proper way of measuring the importance or success of a journal or an editor, because it's not the measure that was made for individual authors. It was not made as a measure for individual journals, more or less, but just a kind of as a general rule of thumb for librarians on how to use the little resources that they have to buy journals, how to use it best so they get the best journals for their readers. So it had nothing to do with the quality of science, or especially of individual scientists. But it has been taken up as by the academic community as something that is so good and so important, and actually it's not something that we should look at or upon only. There are other things that are also very important. I don't want to say that impact factor is not important or any kind of ranking, because nowadays, for example, in the UK, the assessment of researchers is that you have to submit your 5 best papers, and people actually read these papers and then make a decision whether they are good enough for promotion. I'm aware that in smaller scientific communities like ours, this wouldn't do, because if we are a smaller community and, you know, if you're a friend of a friend, of course his 5 papers will be good regardless of any kind of objective criteria. So I think that the objective criteria are important, and impact factor can be one of them, but that is not the best way to, or only way to look at research. But unfortunately, until the scientific community, and especially academic community, which is all about promotions and success of you as a professor, this will not change until they make a change and say, okay, impact factor is not so important and we're not going to look at that so much. So, impact factor is not something that you should look into. But there are other things that you can look at. You can look at your field, and you can look at what is the best journal in your category. So you know that Journal Citation Reports, which collects the information from the Web of Science and calculates impact factor, has categories. So as the first step is, I would say to you how to get published in high-impact journals is, first try the best journal in your area. These are the pieces of advice for younger researchers. Try it in your national journal. Try to publish your first paper in the best national journal. Then try to publish your paper in the journals that are in the first quartile, or the best journals on top of the list of the Web of Science Journal Citation Reports. And then the world is yours. You can try and publish in other journals. So this is one thing. But before that, it's important that you know your field and that you really work a lot and work hard on improving your knowledge, and also think about good ideas that you can have for research. Really hard work and long work pays in the end. Don't think that you can publish your first paper in Nature on Science. You need time to develop into a professional that will be able to have or publish these ideas. And most of all is you have to have good ideas, because sooner or later, if you have a good idea and if you do good research, that will lead you into a good journal. So, and as I said, in medicine we tend to think only about English, but I know that in social science and humanities you can publish really good work in national journals in your own language, but then again it's important that you are part of the global community, and reaching out and publishing in English or other languages is very important in order to join this. So what I want to talk about is, you know, how to get to know what is available there, with the knowledge that only, I don't know, 5 or less than 5% of the papers that are received by Nature will be published by Nature. Rejection rates or acceptance rates in big journals are really, really very small, even in journals that are not science in nature. When I look at the field of medicine, the top journal in medicine, which is New England Journal of Medicine, has the impact factor of Science and Nature combined, because they are about 30, 40, and the impact factor of New England Journal of Medicine is about 80, almost 80. So it's even harder to publish there. And there their acceptance rate is about 1 to 2%. So they accept only 1 to 2% of what is sent to them. And they send only, of what is submitted to them, they send only less than 30% out for peer review. So most of the papers that arrive on the desks of editors in these big journals is rejected at that stage. And this is called desk rejection or editorial rejection. So they read your paper and right away they say, oh, this is not good enough. We're not even sending it for peer review because it doesn't fit what we want for the journal. And from the lucky 30% that's sent out of peer review, again, a very small number gets published, which is really almost infinitesimally low. So with this knowledge, we have to see what is around, where can I look for different journals, for my field, how do I learn about that? And I think the answer there is you have to read a lot. When they ask big writers about, how did you learn to write, what it takes to be a great writer, they usually answer, you first have to read a lot. And this is the same in science. To know what is out there and to see which is the best journal for what you do and for your own ideas, for your article, then you have to read a lot from your field, from a more general field of research that you're in order to know and to see, without even thinking, what is the best place for the research that you do. Of course, sometimes it's very difficult because, it may not be an objective opinion of your work because you are, in love with your research. But it's not bad to aim high. Because what you can hope, okay, I know that this would be maybe for a lower level journal, but if I send it to a journal with a higher impact factor or a kind of journal that has more rejection, maybe I will be lucky that it gets sent out for peer review. And even if they reject me, reject my paper, I will still see the reviewers' comments, and then I will be able to maybe revise my manuscript according to these comments, and I will be successful next time and even perhaps in a better journal. So it's important to play the game of exploring different journals and to aiming always a little bit higher than you think, because sometimes it's luck. Sometimes it's luck when you send your journal and whether you are there at the right time with the right editor or group of editors that will think, oh, this is a good paper, maybe we should send it out for peer review. And if you have the luck to get good reviewers, then you may even get a good outcome. For example, it's known that in high-impact journals, it's good to send your paper during summer months. I have worked for 2 summers in the Lancet, and usually in August they start saying, oh, we should send out more papers for peer review because we don't get enough submissions and we have, to have more to choose from to what we're going to publish. So think about that. If you have a paper ready somewhere in summer, that's a good time to publish, to send it to any journal, because this is kind of a low tide in paper submissions to journals, and you may be lucky in getting more visibility. So how many journals to choose from? So if we say we cannot go for Nature and Science, what can we choose? How many journals there are? Does anybody have an idea? What is out for us to choose? Usually when I ask students, they say, oh, 1,000, 2,000, 10,000, but it's much more, and actually we don't know how many journals there are exactly. In medicine, we're a little bit better in knowing, but the kind of assessment of the number of journals worldwide from all disciplines is very difficult. I just want to start with the past, because it's always good to know the history of your enemy. The journals, if you look at them, a little bit like your enemy, because you have to fight them and you have to win this game. It's important to know how journals started, and it was more than 350 years ago. In 2015, we celebrated that anniversary with the two journals that were published almost at the same time. The first one, the Journal des Scavances, was published in France a few months before the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London, which is actually a journal that still keeps publishing today. So they have Philosophical Transactions A and B, and they are publishing natural sciences. They are not philosophical journals of philosophy, but they publish in natural sciences. So we see that the life of the existence of journals is not something that is new, definitely newer than many of the things we find in Edirne as an important historical site and place in Turkey. But they have quite an interesting life, because when we talk about the structure of a scientific article later on today, we're going to see how they changed and how they were different then from what we have today. And this is what were the topics there, and what is good about the transactions of the Royal Society of London is that they digitize all their issues. So if you go to their archives, you will find papers from 1665 published. So you have volume 1 from 1665, and maybe that would be a good research point for some of the historians here or philosophers of science to see how the science evolved from 1665 and what was published then and what is published now, because they have this really enormous resource of the availability of everything that was published from 350 years ago that you can look into. Of course, I chose medical titles because this is from the Harvey and the transfusions of animals. So, the way how to see how many journals there are in the world is perhaps to go to some kind of directories. There is the Urlich directory, which is a directory of publishers and what is published in the world. I don't have the latest data, but these are data from a couple of years ago. So they say that active academic and scholarly and peer-reviewed journals, that the estimation is about 26 or 27,000. To me, this seems like a small number, because it's not so much, because what we know is that in medicine we have almost like that. Then you also have some kind of summary reports for how many journals are published by different publishers. This is from a couple of years or several years ago, because I didn't have access to newer data. So you see how many journals there are in Elsevier, Springer, Wiley, Taylor and Francis, Sage, Cambridge University Press, Oxford University Press. Pippa can tell you more about Oxford University Press because she worked there. So we see that there are lots of journals published only by the main publisher. And then when you look at how many articles there are there, so in millions, so if you look for articles in the web through different portals, either Google Scholar or available databases that are available for free, you see that it is in hundreds of millions. If you go to PubMed, which is the major medical database for medical research, when you search for any article, you search more than 26 million articles are there. And it's increasing because they are not only adding what is new, but they are also digitizing what they have in paper. So now they are in the 20s, 1920s, and they're going further back. So it's an enormous amount of information, and this is the reason why perhaps when I say you read different journals and you read more journals in order to get acquainted with what they are about and how you can then send it to that journal, it seems true today, because nowadays we're not reading journals. We don't go to libraries as researchers. When was the last time when you had a journal in your hands, a paper version of something? Not really recently. What you do, you search for information, we search articles, we don't look for journals. You may perhaps follow one or two important journals in your field to keep abreast of what is the newest in your field, but you wouldn't read journals, you would search PubMed, you would search some other database, you would search Google Scholar to find the pieces of information that you need. And that has changed perhaps our knowledge of articles, so that we have to go back specifically to learn about journals and how we can publish in there. So you see, it's an enormous amount of information, and be aware of that nowadays you will not know so much about journals. And when you look at Medline, we know, for example, that in medicine, we have also about 24 to 26,000 journals or periodic publications. This is what National Library of Medicine, which is the largest library in medicine in the world, the NIH in Bethesda in the USA, they say we receive on an annual basis about 25,000 periodic literature. That means journals, something that is published on a regular basis. And then they say from that, only 18,000 is indexable. This means that it has scientific information, so they are real research scientific journals. And out of that, we index, they say, here about a little bit less than 5,000 journals. So even when you're searching a database, bibliographical database, you are searching only a small part of the largest volume of journals that we have. And this is, for example, for us in medicine, this is important because we know when we're searching for evidence to be included in what is called systematic reviews and meta-analysis, which is a synthesis of evidence that can guide us in practice, so we know what is the true effectiveness of a drug from the evidence that we have, from research that is published or not published, and how we can translate it to practice. We have to know the existence of everything that was published about a certain question that we have. So this is the reason when you search for such evidence, you cannot only search databases, because if I search only PubMed, I will see only 1/3 of what is published in the world. So I have to go to other databases and search grey literature in order to find all the articles that are published about, I don't know, a drug that I'm interested in, so that I get a true knowledge of that drug. And we know that because a lot of research is published outside of the main databases, and some research is never published, what we know about drugs is, for example, at least 4 to 10% better than it really is, because most of the studies that we cannot find are the studies that didn't show that there was difference, so negative studies that nobody wants to publish. So this kind of publication bias is something that is very important in some fields of research. And for example, in PubMed, you see that they have 5,000 journals indexed in Medline or Index Medicals, and they have a little bit of additional journals that are published, also available in this portal. So PubMed is a kind of a portal or a gateway or interface to search Medline, which is a bibliographical database of journals and articles. So by publishing in a journal that is in any database, not only in Web of Science, which calculates impact factor, but in any database, is already a sign that you are publishing in a good journal. Because somebody has looked through these journals and chose from 18,000 journals, chose less than 5,000 journals that are of good quality that can be included in a respectable database. So as a first step, or the second step, is the first step, go and publish and learn how to write and how to go through the publishing process in a small journal, maybe in your country, and then go to any good index journal that is from your field. Then you have a kind of like a postgraduate education, and you become a better writer and a better published researcher. And then, sky is the limit. You just have to have good ideas and have this passion for research and good ideas. But I'm going to talk about it in the next lecture. And there are different ways, I'm not going to talk about details here, but there are different ways how we can assess the quality of a journal. It can be based on citations, and then we have databases that calculate citations to a journal as a sign that something was important and that other people cited it. So then we have different metrics like the impact factor. You have metric that is produced, for example, by Scopus, because actually now at the moment we have 2 or 3 databases that produce citations. It's Web of Science, which produces impact factor. That's the Scopus, which is another citation database produced by Elsevier, and we have Google Scholar, because there on Google Scholar you also get citations and it's free. It's available to everybody. I think that this obsession with impact factor started because impact factor was invented by Eugene Garfield, a librarian or information scientist who worked in and organized established the Institute for Scientific Information, which was an independent scholarly organization. But now it was first bought by Thomson Reuters, now it's bought by Clarivate Analytics, and they are as commercial as Elsevier Scopus. Actually, what is free for everybody and what is a fair field for everybody is Google Scholar. So citations for Google Scholar, your H index from Google Scholar is also something that is important. And as I said, just indexation in a good database, in a high quality database that have a strict process for including journals is also an achievement, because you publish in these journals. Or there are other aspects. You have some regional databases, and for example, Latin America is very famous for their Latin American databases for journals also published in Spanish and in Portuguese. For example, Cielo, that is also a kind of a good gateway for the publication or indexing in Medline or something. So impact factor is useful, and you can look at impact factor as a target of your wish to publish, and it has good and bad sides. Good side is that it's simple to use. It's just one number. Actually, mathematicians would tell you that that number doesn't mean much, because we don't even know confidence interval for this. How we estimate from what we calculate on a journal whether it's really true for all articles in the journal and for the journal across time or for that group of journals. And why it works is that academic community is obsessed by impact factor. So until that is changed, there will be not much change in this. But the problem is that it's very discipline oriented. So in some disciplines you have a high metabolism of research, and something that was published 6 months ago or a year is already obsolete and nobody's citing it. But there are disciplines, like in psychiatry, if you cite Freud's dreams from 1929, it's still valid, and you can have all citations, okay? So, and in some fields, I know medicine best, if you want to publish in orthopedic journal, they don't have the impact factor higher than 3, perhaps. Ophthalmology, 2 to 3 is the best ophthalmology journal. So you cannot say, oh, I published in a not a good journal if you publish in the best ophthalmology journal. It's just that the size is so small and there are not so many people to cite from. So that's why the number is small. Of course, you can have self-citations. I'm going to talk about that more tomorrow, how you can get kicked out of the Web of Science if you try to manipulate, and trust me, and as I said, we're going to talk about it tomorrow. All journals manipulate their impact factor, and there are ways how to do that. And also, in big journals, so the journals with the highest impact factor are journals that publish only reviews. So on top of the list of the most journals with the highest impact factor are, annual reviews in biochemistry, annual reviews in immunology, because everybody cites a paper. But for me, this is not a good way for small journals to increase impact factor, because everybody's going to cite review from Science or Nature and not from a small journal. And of course, number of papers published. If you don't publish many papers, your impact factor is going to be high. And as I said, there is a way how to increase that. There are different sources of indexes, like library catalogs or quality-controlled listings, and you should aim for that, like Medline or CAB abstracts, which are for chemistry, and agrarian sciences, or citation indexes like Web of Knowledge, Scopus. Google Scholar is not selected in any way. And as this is just a brief information about the Web of Science and also Scopus, As you see, impact factor, eigenfactor is kind of a derivative of impact factor that people say, oh, it's a little bit better, but everything is about citation for papers in the journals, which for me is not the best way. Whereas Elsevier produces this SNP and SJR indicator and so on. So what is an impact factor? Just so that you know when you are making a choice about your journal, is kind of the average number of citations that a work published in this journal in the past 2 years receives in the year after this. So how many people in a short period of time, so within 2 years of what was published, how much they cite your paper. And as I said, it was invented by Eugene Garfield as a measure to help librarians how to choose the best journal. So he said, with this formula, we can choose about 10% of the best or most influential, not the best, most influential journals in the scientific community, and that's a good use of the money that library has. So we buy the best 10% of the journals. Nowadays, that everything is open, that you can buy an article for $30, this has changed, and this doesn't have the same origin as the original idea of Eugene Garfield. And not many journals have high impact factor. I'm just showing what I know best, and this is the category from the Journal Citation Reports for general medicine and internal medicine. And you see that only less than 8 journals out of 155 journals in this category has impact factor higher than 10, even less. I think 4 journals or 6 journals have impact factor higher than 10. Most of them are there, you know, in this line. So this is not a normal distribution. The median, so the impact factor that is in the middle of this group is 1.3. And look, New England Journal, that was for the last period, has had an impact factor of 72 compared to the last one, which had an impact factor of 0.038. So this is not a normal distribution like something you see in a real world, but it's really very skewed distribution, and very few have high impact factors, and it's very difficult to get in there. And you may look for some other parameters like this from Scopus. I'm not going to go into that because there is lots of mathematics in here, how they decided to form these indicators, but they're also about the number of citations, or SNP, again published by physicists and a quite complicated methodology. But for example, from this data you can extract, if you go to SciMargo, which is a way of graphical presentation of journal information, maybe this is a good way how to look for your journal. I have chosen here this SciMargo visual tool, and I said, okay, these are all the journals. So they show the journals and their relationship and intercitations and how they belong to different fields of science. So you have here, for example, physical therapy, and you have ophthalmology. So this is a part of social sciences and medical sciences. And then I can say, okay, I want to have all cardiovascular journals. And then I get from all of these population of journals, I get these journals, and the higher the size, the higher the quality of the number of citations, the number of published records for this journal. I can say then, okay, I want only that are online. I want people to be able to find my article online. So I can filter that and I see only a smaller group of journals. Or I can say I want only the best. I want cardiovascular journals that are only in the first quarter, the best quarter of these journals. So I can select that, and of course I see that the Circulation, which is the best journal in the cardiovascular field, stands out. So, but what I want to finish my presentation, I hope I'm not running too late, is that you beware of predatory journals. And I don't like that they are called predatory. They are pseudo-journals. They're not real journals. They're journals for money. They just publish because they want to earn money or get money from authors, and kind of they lure them in to publishing into something that is not indexed, that nobody is going to read. This is the definition of a predatory journal, that they are out just to make money from you and not really to propagate and to publish good research. Their intention is to receive, they charge you money and they say, okay, you can publish in 72 hours, and so like this one. If you submit on January 27, you will have receive notification of acceptance, so they even mention a review process on January 29th, and you will be published 2 days afterwards. So I'm sure that many of you receive these nice letters every morning. Oh, dear colleague, we were impressed by your article, this, and this, and we offer you the publication in our journal. Just send us $500 and we'll publish this. So it's really conflict of interest because they are out to make money, not to publish good research. They spam, so they send these mails to everybody, and believe me, even the best journals. I know a professor in Europe at a very renowned university, professor of philosophy, who teaches research integrity and ethics, that was caught in this and submitted a paper to a journal, learned that this is a pseudo journal, and now doesn't know how to retract his paper from this journal. So targeting young researchers from smaller scientific community, and they mimic legitimate publishers. There are even some fake journals. These are some kind of characteristics of these journals. And what I can advise you as authors, there is a very nice webpage that is called Think, Check, Submit, that helps you how to check a journal that you're interested in, and how to see that it's really a good journal, that it's not a fake journal, that you will not spend $500 on something that will not be good for your promotion, and that you can then submit to this journal. And they have, for example, fake metrics. They have these signs of their journals that says Global Impact Factor, Einstein Institute for Scientific Information, Journal Impact Factor, International Scientific Indexing. So they all make it look like it's a really legitimate journal, but they are not. So there used to be a Beale's list. So there was a librarian who listed what he thought were predatory journals. This list is now down, although you can access, you can find it on the web. And now you have like Cabels, which is a commercial service that helps you look for predatory journals and then evade them. But unfortunately, this is not free, and I'm not really a fan of it that much. So you have journals that try to make themselves look like the real journal. For example, you hear this is called hijacking. So they make a name that is very similar to a journal, like here. This is Jockle Journal, and this is the legitimate journal, Jockle Journal of Earth Sciences, that has the same name, almost looks the same, and people think they're submitting to another journal, and they're actually submitting to a journal that is a fake journal. And I couldn't find information for the latest years, but the number of these hijacked journals is increasing. So be careful, and this is what I said when I said read journals, get to know your field, because this is also a good way how to evade predatory publishing. So this is published characteristics. It was from a big study, although I don't agree with many of them, because they say if the article publication charge is low, like less than $100, this is true for many small scientific community academic journals that cannot charge much from the local authors, and especially, if it comes from a Gmail. One important thing for you as authors, try to send, when you're submitting your paper, to send it from your official address, not from your Gmail or Yahoo account, because that doesn't sound professional, and it is kind of a signal to editors that, you may not be a true author or something. So it's much better to use your professional emails, both as editors and reviewers, because that is a sign of legitimacy in this case. Or maybe you can go to a directory of open access journals. And as I'm just showing these numbers to show you that at some point when they realized that this kind of push from fake journals, predatory journals, was really very high, they said, okay, now we stop. We are expulsing everybody, and everybody has to reapply now. We are going to check everybody to make sure that we're not indexing predatory journals, because open access is a model of publishing and paying for, which you all know about, for publication is something where paid journals and predatory journals come in. So you see from March 2016, when they said, okay, we're going to now reevaluate everybody, every member in our database, they went down to 9,090 journals, and now they are increasing again because they are carefully checking everybody that is there. And for example, if you want to look for a good journal for your paper, there are some internet tools that you can use that are for free, like this Journal Author Name Estimator. So you can type in your abstract, and then it will return you similar publications in other journals. Now, which journals publish similar topics that you have? And that can be a good guide for you to find a journal, to find a good peer reviewer, because some journals may ask you to suggest peer reviewers, so these will be the good ways of looking for a good journal. Maybe not with the highest impact factor, but a good journal to learn from. So I just want to finish with this, a small kind of a funny note about impact factor from Hilda Bastian, who is a blogger and a patient. Actually, she's what we call the consumer representative, a member of the public that takes interest in science and writes about science for the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marsic. Is there any question? Sorusu olan var mı arkadaşlar? Ara vermeden diğer konuşmamıza geçiyoruz.
So we can continue. Okay. So Jen gave me difficult questions. Top 10 reasons for rejection or acceptance. And I told Jen yesterday that I'm going to kind of use the folk saying that we have in Croatia, that a good horse has thousands of faults, but has one virtue, and that is good. So there is actually one good reason that is above all the reasons for accepting or rejecting a paper, and that is you have to have good research. Now, if you come with a great idea and you work on that idea in a proper way, then you don't have to be frightened to publish. And I have kind of made a provisional list of what is important, but this is not kind of in order of importance, but it really has to be exciting. It has to be novel. That doesn't mean that you're going to, use high technology or develop a new, discover new genes or something, but it has to be something that nobody has thought about before. For example, the paper, I have published many papers, but probably the paper that I'm most proud of is a paper that doesn't get many citations, but it was published in the Lancet, and it's about history of medicine. So I'm an anatomy teacher, and I once visited a museum of wax anatomy figures in Vienna, and I asked the colleague, so did you study it from the anatomical point of view? Did the concepts in anatomy change? Did people in the 18th century, when these wax figures were made, thought about anatomy in a different way than we think today? So we made a study of these 286 wax specimens, and we discovered that, like we do today, we either see too much when we have imaging methods that we see in a living body, even the smallest detail, or we see too little. It was the same thing that happened when anatomy was the only science in medicine. There was no other science. And our message with this article is that teaching or learning morphology was equally important nowadays when we have imaging methods that we have to interpret, because the computer is not going to interpret it for us, as it was then when anatomy was the only way of doing science in medicine. And, Lancet saw the excitement and the importance of this paper, and we were really very happy to publish. And I even have a peer review report framed on my wall because it says, this is a nice study. And that was all what the reviewer said. So this is something that is really very good. So think of new things. Think of things that other people didn't do. And I said it can be something that is local, but you know, maybe we often learn from some new things from small. If you have a new disease, a new thing, you can publish in New England Journal of Medicine, which has the highest impact factor, if it is really good. Part of this first list of exciting research is also that you have to do it in a proper way. And this is what I see and why I think it's important to teach students from an early age is to have it done the proper way. So study design, the methodology to which you're approaching your research question and your hypothesis is crucial. If you're trying to say, I don't know, this drug is better than that drug, and you just look at 14 of your patients, will not get you published in almost any journal. If you want to test a drug, you need to do a randomized, controlled, double-blind trial, because this is the best methodology to answer the question that you have. Is this drug better than the drug that we have so far? If you want to learn about, you know, the etiology of diseases, you know, what causes a disease? Of course, you cannot make experiments on people, you can on laboratory animals, but on people you would do a cohort study. So follow people that are either exposed or not exposed to a certain factor, and then follow them for a certain amount of time to see who will develop. So we're calculating what is called absolute risk or incidence of new cases, and then we conclude on how much is the risk for developing something higher in people who are exposed to one factor than to the other. Sometimes we cannot do it, so we'll do a retrospective analysis of these risk factors using a case control study. Sometimes we just want to have an ecological experience and see what is the state and what happens in a certain region, a country, or a field. Sometimes you want to do anthropological research, that you observe a community or a group and write about it. Sometimes you will have a question that is more of a studying documentation, and like in history, you're going to do a meta-research studying literature. So there are different ways of how we, when we have a research question or hypothesis, it can be hypothesis generating, so you can do a qualitative research, but the methodology is the key. For us editors, when I look at first the abstract, that's why the abstract is on the second place. Whenever I see that the methodological approach to the study that you have is not adequate, is not the best for it, you don't stand a good chance to be published. Because the methodology and the methodological approach, the rigor of how you answered you tested your hypothesis, answered your question is crucial. This is why we have, at least in the field of medicine, a lot of tools to help us how to present and explain our research so that the methodology is clear. They're called reporting guidelines, and I'm sure that people from the medical field know about reporting guidelines. So these are like some kind of checklist that tell you, in order that we have a minimum information of what you did in your study, this is what you have to have written in your paper. This is what you have to write in the title. This is what is important that you mentioned in the introduction. These are the methodological aspects that you have to clearly explain, you know, what was the population that you drew your sample from, what was the size of the sample, how did you come to that, how did you measure, what were the outcomes that you measured, what kind of comparisons you did, what did you do with the missing data, what type of analysis did you do? Did you do intent to treat analysis, or you did some other type of analysis? And then it tells you this is how you have to present the result, this is what we want to see. And then in the discussion and also other declarations like who funded it, do you have any conflict of interest, if it were a clinical trial, was it registered, and so on and so on. So nowadays you have about, I think, 400 different types of reporting guidelines that you can find on Equator Network, that's if you Google it you'll find it, that address all kinds of different types of studies that help you not only write your paper, but if you read it beforehand, you will then know more about the methodology that is the best way to approach different research questions that we have. So doing good research and having exciting ideas, and by doing research I mean doing a rigorously, methodologically well executed research, will bring you wherever you want. You know, good idea and good work is the crucial thing. Why did I put engaging abstract? It's for me, from my point of view of an editor. Because the first thing that we're going to read from your article is the abstract. Okay? And if the abstract doesn't tell me much about what you did, I will probably reject it. It will be a top desk rejection. They actually, one journal did a study on this. So the British Medical Journal did a randomized trial. So this is really methodologically well executed, so we can trust the results that they got. The results were valid, where they allocated either reading of the full article or just reading the abstract to different editors that read the paper when it comes to the journal to decide whether it will be sent out for peer review. Remember, only 1/3 of what editors read will go to peer review. And they showed in this randomized trial that it's enough for an editor. The decisions were the same whether he read the whole article or just the abstract. So these 200 or 300 words that you write are the most important part of your article, because you are going to be judged on that. Many journals, including my journal that I publish now, the Journal of Global Health, and PLOS Medicine Journal has the same approach. We have what is called the pre-submission inquiry. So we ask you, send us your abstract, and then we'll make a decision so that you don't have to wait, you know, for weeks or something until we get to read the whole of your paper. Just send us your abstract, and in 2 days we'll tell you whether we think this is interesting for us. This doesn't mean that your work is not good. Interesting for a journal means that it fits to what we want to publish, you know, the niche of our journal, what we see the journal as, you know, what type of articles we want to publish, what topics we want to publish. And sometimes it may be your bad luck, because we have published a number of papers on your topic, so we want to try something new, and you will be rejected, not because your work is not good, but just because at that moment, it's not the best for my journal. And very often, especially if you're an editor in a small journal, like I was of the Croatian Medical Journal, it creates lots of enemies, because then people tell me, oh, you rejected my paper and I published it in, I don't know, in the European Cardiology Journal. I said, yes, because I'm a general medical journal, and we don't publish specialty cardiology papers. That's why I rejected it, not because it wasn't good, but it was not for us. And again, I come to my advice from the previous lecture. Read journals, know what they're about, because then you will know whether your paper is for that journal or not. This is really very important. So abstracts, very important part of the journal, not only because the editors will be the first ones to read it and make a decision, but also when people search, and we know, and there are published research that says that the behavior of researchers and how they read and look for literature and papers is not through journals, but through databases. So when they type in their keywords, this is what they're going to see first, your abstract that will be published there, and that has to make them wish to go and read your whole paper and cite them. This is how you get citations. So abstracts are crucial. And unfortunately, people don't pay much attention to abstracts. There were studies also in journals, and this is all about medical journals because it's the field that I know most of. Very often, and I think it's about more than 20%, about 24% of papers have differences in abstracts and in the body of the text. So the numbers that you see in abstracts are different from the numbers that you see in the paper. Probably because, you know, authors rush because they have got, you know, oh, it was accepted in this good journal. I will make all the changes that are required for me. I have to make some new calculations. And then in this hurry, you forget to change these numbers in the abstract. So pay special attention to the abstract, because when the decisions are made by the editor at the very beginning of your submission to a journal, this will be very important. And also then when people search for it and look out to see who they cite, who they want to cite, again, abstracts will be important. So very important. I don't know how it is in different fields. I know that in many fields of social sciences and humanities, you go for like ordinary abstracts. It's a little paragraph of text that is about 150, 200, 250 words. In medicine, we want it structured. That means that it's structured in the same way as the article is structured, usually in 4 parts, like introduction, what you wanted to do, methods, how I approached this question, results, what I got, and conclusions, what I did. So even if the journal that you're sending your article to doesn't require structured abstract, this is how you're going to write it in 1 paragraph. What I wanted to do, why is this important, how I did it, what were the results, what the results were, and then what is the conclusion from this. So this IMRAD structure is important not only because it's common, but because it's also a best way for us to understand. You know, when you look at from the point of view of cognitive psychology, our brain likes information that is structured. It's called chunking of data. We understand a piece of information, when it's structured visually in different parts, because then we can process it better, understand it better, and remember it better. And also our brain likes patterns, that when we read information, that every new information is structured in a similar way, that we first have the introduction, that is, we have methods, and then we have results, and then we have conclusions. This structuring and patterning of information is very important, because it will make your paper easier to understand, people will remember it, and then again that may bring to more citations. I'm going to talk about it a bit more. I just want to go through this to this list. Statistics. At least in the field of medicine, we want to see proper statistics, either that you have done, or maybe with the help of a professional statistician, that statistical analysis, which is again an indicator of a methodological rigor of your paper, is well done. Okay? What statisticians will tell you, don't come to us when you finish your study. It's like a pathologist. I can tell you what your paper died of, but I cannot help you make a better paper. And this is what we saw, and why we started training students, because people usually say, oh, it's a problem because we don't know English, it's very difficult for us to publish. No, English is the least problem. That can be corrected. But if I cannot understand what you wanted to do, if you went about answering a question with the wrong methodological approach, you don't stand a chance to get published in a good journal. Because editors first look, and we actually, as an editor, I really got trained, which wasn't my first training. I'm a kind of a basic researcher. I worked with mice in my whole life, and I say to my fellow clinicians, guys, you are the ones that have to know statistics. Statistics for me, who works with genetically identified animals, inbred strains, is simple. But you work with a heterogeneous population, and Bayesian statistics and probability statistics is something that you have to know, not only to be a good scientist, but to be a good practitioner and good professional. So this is very important. Consult a statistician before you start your research. Of course, you have to have sound conclusions that stem from what your research is about, and that you also address the limitations. People are very often, or as authors, say, oh, but why should I kind of speak badly about my research? This is good research. Yes, but it's better that you speak about the limitations of your study than that reviewers identify you and then have a very critical appraisal of your article. Many journals now require that you have a separate section in the discussion that you talk about limitations. You know, okay, I did a survey. Surveys are, problematic from many different aspects because of the design, the way we do surveys, because people give their answer about what they think they do and what they think, and not about what they really do. So you have to say, okay, we did a survey. It's limited by the methodological limitations of the survey, but we had 80% response rate, which makes it really representative of the population that we talk about in this question. So by talking about the limitations of your study, you can also say the good sides of your study, why your study is still good. Maybe it's the first such study ever performed. You have to say, at least to the best of your knowledge, because you have to search literature for that and so on and so on. And it has to be a nice story. There is a field in peer review research that is called spin. So there are ways how you can spin your results. So you've got kind of marginally significant results, but you spin it out that it's, oh, it's very significant and it's good. So you shouldn't alter the results that you get, but you can tell a nice story, regardless of the fact what you want. You know, it's not like reading a book, because reading scientific journals is really much, much more difficult than reading a literature book, because of the way how we talk in science and how the language is in science. But still, if you say a smooth story that everything follows from one from another, every paragraph follows one from another, you will have a nice impression on your reviewers and editors, because they will say, oh yes, this is all clear and we understand it. That's very important. As I said, reporting guidelines, very helpful, so that you make sure that everything that has to be in this type of article and this type of study that you did is there, so that the reviewers will not ask, oh, but I didn't mention this, oh, so that's why this is not a good paper. So that you have the minimum data that is required for the type of study that you did is in there, so that everybody can see how good it is. Of course, you have to have relevant references, and what I said before, if you want to be a good writer, you have to read a lot, so you have to know your field. Some journals say, like The Lancet and the big medical journals, if you don't cite or if you didn't perform a systematic review on a topic, so that you know what is there in literature and what is our current knowledge, you cannot submit a paper to our journal. Because we want you to know what is there and to say, okay, this is what we know, this is what is left unanswered, these are the gaps in knowledge that we have, and this is what we try to answer in our article. So doing some kind of systematic, it doesn't have to be a proper systematic review with meta-analysis, it can be a scoping review, overview of literature. It's a good way to start your introduction and saying, this field, you know, this problem is known, this is what we know, this is what is still unanswered, and therefore our study aims at answering one of these questions that are still gaps in knowledge. So proper referencing and proper overview of literature, and this is why, for example, when you're publishing from a PhD thesis, it's really important that you know, like you have to know for your PhD thesis, that you know the field that you're looking at. Oh, well laid out table, this is a typo here. So very often when I look at figures, or editors in general, when they look at figures and tables, they are a mess. I don't understand what's in there, what are the columns, what are the rows, what are different symbols and figures. They have to be really nice and clear, and I think Pippa is going to talk about that later on, that the information there is clear. And one rule that what is in a figure and a table has to be understood without looking at the rest of the manuscript. So you cannot write in the legend, for detail C methods. No, you have to explain everything, every abbreviation, everything that is there, every p-value that you have in a table or a figure, so they have to self-stand. Why? Because this is how readers, scientists, and reviewers too read articles. We don't read them like a novel from start to the end. But what, this is a type, again, research about how researchers read. It's called skipping and skimming. You first read the title, you read the last sentence of the abstract, you read the last paragraph of introduction, which tells you the aim of the study. You go and look at the numbers and tables and figures, and then you read the last paragraph of the discussion. And then you decide whether you want to read the whole article or not. So paying attention to these details, and especially the tables or figures, are understood are very important. Yeah. And again, in some fields, like in medicine, because what we publish can really kill people if it's not correct, we have all kinds of declarations, registration. If you're doing a trial, you have to register it before the first patient is enrolled. You have to declare your conflicts of interest. You have to declare authorship contribution. You have to declare funding. So there are all kinds of, whether you pre-registered results, whether you're going to share your data from the study. Some journals will not even accept your paper if you don't say or already share data from the research that you did. So there are different declarations that you have to do in some journals. Okay, just I want to say IMRAT, this is the acronym for the structure of the journal, which is actually the way how we do research. It's about testing a hypothesis. It's a logical argument. You know, like if you remember logic from high school, you have your hypothesis, then you decide on the methodological approach to this hypothesis, then you bring your arguments and counter-arguments, and you make a conclusion. So this is how we report science now, especially in hypothesis testing fields. If you have a qualitative research, if you have hypothesis generating research, this may be different, but generally it's about what I wanted to study, how I studied it, what the results were, and what this means, what the conclusions are. Structure is important. As I said, our brains like patterns, they like when things are sorted visually in different parts. So it's important that when somebody is reading your paper, you know where they are, where they're going, and why they're going that way. Okay, so structure is always at the heart of any journal. And from research, we know that this is a typical, for example, in medicine, this is the typical construction or the length of a paper. So these triangles present paragraphs. It can be a little bit different. This is for biomedicine. For example, in biomedicine, we know that the length of an introduction is about up to 18% of the whole text. Social sciences, introduction can go up to 30% of the whole paper, because in social sciences, you are trained to, to have the theory and then evidence, summarize the evidence and then go into your hypothesis. In medicine, we do it by piecemeal, so we don't spend too much on an introduction, we just cite a systematic review and then continue with what we wanted to say. So the methods have about 6 paragraphs, the results the same, and discussion may also have the same or maybe one more. But these triangles in yellow, and why are they inverted triangles? Because each paragraph has to start from a general point of view and then focus. So I can say, we approached the population of that many people. From there were that many female, that many males, and then you kind of analyze it to more detail. But each paragraph should start with a general message and then go into specific message. Why are they in yellow? Because these are the parts that a reader will read. So when I told about the skipping and skimming technique, this is what people read. The first paragraph to know what it is about, what's the problem. The second paragraph of the introduction, what you did. The first paragraph of the discussion is about the summary of what you wanted to do. At least this is in biomedicine. We like to start, you as editors, you to start a discussion. Our study showed, and then talk about the main results of your study. We don't want to say again, oh, this is an important problem in health, and then many people have approached it, and then only in the second or third paragraph you talk about what you wanted to do. So don't repeat the introduction, start with the main finding of your study, and the last paragraph is your message. Why is this important? In conclusion, our study showed this, and this is important, this is what we have to do, and so on and so on. So this is your message, and this is what people are going to read first. Just to illustrate how this kind of our cognitive abilities are important, I will illustrate it with a title. Because title is important because it helps the reader to make appropriate connections. And I have an example. It says, this text says, the process is simple. First you arrange things in different groups depending on their makeup, of course. One pile may be sufficient. Do we know what we're talking about? Not really, but if I put a title, it's very clear that you cannot mix colored clothes and white ones because you're going to get a disaster of colors afterwards. So titles are important because they help our brain connect to what you read afterwards. So that's why, for example, in social medicine and in the social sciences and humanities, it's good to have to think about the subtitles, subheadings that you're going to give, because they will help the readers understand the text that is coming afterwards. These are the definition of the title. Very important, because the first thing people will see when they search databases is the title. So you want it good or nice, sometimes challenging, because that will make people read. It can be, there are two types. It's called indicative or informative or declarative. In the second one, you see what was the result of the study. So they say what was the study, yeah? It prevents depression, this therapy. In indicative title, you say, this is what I studied. And very often in medicine, we would need to state the study design so that, you know, if as a reader, I would first read randomized control trial, and I will not read your experience with 14 patients that I gave this drug to. So in medical journals in general, this is not true for all other fields, like in Nature papers, they are all new gene for this and that. In basic sciences, very often you will hear this informative titles, but editors in most of the medical journals would like indicative titles. Because if you say, this drug cures cancer, it's too dogmatic, it's like a yellow literature. It's not kind of convincing, and we need to do many more studies so that this really is confirmed and becomes a standard practice. So in medicine, we would always ask, very often, some journals like declarative titles, but many would have these indicative titles, because what you're saying is not definitive, just kind of a beginning of the truth that is the agreement of researchers about what truth is, because we cannot know it for sure. You can emphasize different things. For the reader, what is coming at the beginning of a title is the most important thing. So in these examples, if nobody has studied this topic, like the maintenance of major depression in old age, this is what you want to emphasize. So this is the first study on this population and this therapy. If nobody has done a randomized trial on this topic, then you would put a randomized, so the methodological type of study you will emphasize, because this is the most important message that you're having, that you are the first to do a randomized trial in that field. So depending on what you want to emphasize, try to put it towards the beginning of the title. Then authors and bylines, and here we come into a mess. Authorship is something that is very problematic and it's a precious thing because it's the currency of the academic community. But you have to be aware, especially when you collaborate with different fields, that the rules for authorship are different. So why do I have authors in byline? This is what is called the byline, because there can be some other authors that are not mentioned here on this line below the title, but they are there in acknowledgement. These are what is called contributors. So your name may be in Medline, not as an author, and you're not appearing on the byline, but can be mentioned as contributors. These are all the different new things that are involving in authorship. But be aware that when you're collaborating with different people, they may have different expectations, and that can also determine the fate of your article. These are the standards in medicine. So in medicine, it is about doing research and writing or contributing to writing research, and everybody being responsible for what you publish. So if anybody has any questions about what you did, everybody has to answer for this research. So the integrity of what is published is your responsibility. You have to take that responsibility. But, you know, there are different standards. So this is a screenshot from PubMed. What you see up there, it's not an abstract, it's the list of authors. And what you see at the below is the whole abstract. So until recently, this was like the record on Medline with 743 authors. It's from physics. And it's from high energy physics, where the rules are very different. The rules in high energy particle physics, whoever contributed to this research in whatever form, whenever, is an author. So if I wrote a piece of computer code 20 years ago, and it's still in the computer that is being used today, I am the author on that paper, although I did nothing but write a small piece of code 20 years ago. So these are huge authorships, and of course you cannot have the same rules like in biomedicine for us. The first author is somebody who has done everything, by hand, and the last author is the boss, in between other people that contributed. So the first is like a PhD student, his mentor is the last, and in between are people that contributed in some way. In physics, you don't know who is the most important, because it's all alphabetical too. So the rules there are completely different, and even in academic advancement. And until recently, so I think I needed 6 screens, print screens, to present all authors on this paper. So this is the end. It was the first paper that was published from the Hadron Collider from CERN when they looked for bosons, and it had 2,080 authors. Nowadays, papers from this group from CERN have more than 5,000 authors, because, you know, the collaboration grows, and everybody who was there in the beginning keeps there. So rules can be completely different. In philosophy, if you have 2 authors, it's strange. In mathematics, usually it happens that you have 2 authors in mathematics when the reviewer has some, you know, very critical suggestion, and the editor says, okay, you guys get together and sort it out, and then there are 2 authors. In many fields, especially in social sciences and humanities, you are expected to be the sole author of your paper if you want a PhD thesis. So beware, especially nowadays when we have multidisciplinary collaborative research, that you are not faced with these problems. Discuss authorship first. When you have an idea, you want to do it, say to a colleague, okay, we have this idea. It's my idea, and I will do most of the work. I will be the first author, you will be the second. And then you make some kind of provisionary plan for authorship before you start, because it will keep you out of many problems afterwards. Abstracts, I said, are very important because they structure information. They are the first one the editors and the audience will see, and it's very important that it is structured. And even if it's not structured in a form visually, it will always have these 4 parts of a kind of approach to hypothesis testing. And in some fields, like in medicine, you will have the methodology even hyperstructured. Because for a busy clinician, it's important to see what is relevant for him to make a conclusion on the patient. So he or she is going to look for randomized trials on many patients, because that can then be used for the patient that the doctor has. And these are just like the pieces of advice how to write different sections of the abstract and still get, constrained in those 200 or 300 words, but Pippa is going to talk more about that in her presentation. But sometimes these are examples of actual abstracts. One word. Oh, they come from physics. So the first one, is the sequence of earthquakes in southeastern California with aftershocks removed Poissonian? Yes. Or the second one, can apparent superluminal neutrino speeds be explained as a quantum weak measurements? Probably not. So editors like new things. I very often tell students, there are some interesting titles, like you have a paper published in Nature. Oh, it was in 1986. Why beat egg whites in copper bowls? It's not a culinary magazine, but it's Nature. So they explain, what happens when you denature the albumin, how you make single chains and then wrap them, you kind of break hydrogen bonds. Then these hydrogen bonds reform around bubbles of air, and that's how you make this white fluffy thing. And cations, like copper, contribute to strengthening these new hydrogen bonds and make the foam stronger. And they did a chemical exploration of it and explained why is that the double cations, like copper or calcium or magnesium, are important in strengthening the white foam after beating egg whites. And it was published in Nature. So it's really important to have a good idea when you're publishing your paper. People can talk about this more in detail, but this is just kind of a general structural introduction. You start from the general and then focus. What we know about this problem, and then focusing on what you're going to do in your paper. Again, usually, at least in biomedicine, 2 paragraphs, much more in social sciences and in humanities. Why you did the study and what was the aim of your study. Methods are like a recipe. It's very important for other fellow scientists because they want to see how you did it so that they can judge the rigor of the methodology to use, and also that I can repeat it, not repeat the experiments, but use your methodology to kind of continue that line of research. So it has to be detailed enough so that people understand what you do, but you don't have to write it in long methods. It's enough to cite methodology when it's published somewhere else. Don't forget statistics, and especially when you're dealing with human participants, don't forget about ethics and ethics approvals for that. Results are very, of course, important, and what you have to keep in mind that you have to make a distinction between the text and the figures and tables. Text tells a story, and figures and tables illustrate it, so they help us understand the story. So you shouldn't have too many numbers and complicated things in the text, because it saves space, because they are presented in tables and figures. And the text should kind of lead us and make calls to tables and figures so that we better understand our story. Okay? Tables summarize what we count usually, and figures, illustrations, they are there to show us how things relate to each other, how they change through time. So they show us relationship and changes, and tables are actually when we count, for example, for categorical variables and so on. So general advice for tables, make them not too long, make them simple and clear, and for figures, not much ink. I always tell students, you have to think of tables as figures in terms of music as Bach. Everything symmetrical, mathematical, not Mozart, not too many colors. We prefer that your figures are in black and white, that you don't have three-dimensional graphs. Why? Because we don't want to look at the beauty of the colors that you chose and how you structured everything. We want to see the data. So think IKEA, Scandinavian design, simplicity. Because what I want when I read your table or a figure, I want your data to hit me, not the shade of blue that you use. Okay? Because it's important that you show data, and you can show it to our brain in a way that is clear, that is stripped of all the other beauties that are pleasing for us when we go to an art museum, but for a scientific paper, you want data to talk. For example, this is a paper that didn't have any tables or figures. Everything was in the text. It was difficult to read because our brain likes to see noun, verb, and the longer the distance between the noun and verb is difficult for our brain to keep in working memory, so we will not understand it better. So you want to keep sentences simpler, because then people will understand what you talk about. Okay, beware of these things. For those in medicine, I can really recommend this book from Lang and Setic, which is an excellent guide written by a statistician and a researcher of how to best present data in your paper. See, I don't have conflict of interest. I just like the book because it was very useful for me in teaching students. Discussion, the opposite stylistic image than the introduction. Here you start from what you found. Our study shows that this is important or this works. And then you generalize. It is similar to other studies, it's different from other studies. This is what is needed to be studied. This is how it can be used in practice. This is my message. So you generalize in the discussion, and you kind of focus in the introduction. Again, the first and the last paragraph are important, and this is what researchers will read. Paper, what you got and what it means and what your message is. So you have to keep it simple and think about who is going to read it, because very often you understand everything, and especially if you're writing for a more general journal, think about that nobody's going to understand the language of your professional specialty. So you get a cardiology paper and it's all full of acronyms and abbreviations, which we ordinary doctors don't understand. Please write it clearly. Think of the audience you write for, because then it's going to be much better. And very often I will just conclude this with a message. We're going to talk about reviewers, but my advice to people is have your own review before you send it to the journal. And I usually say, send it to 3 reviewers. First can be somebody from your lab or your department, somebody who knows the same field. So they can see, maybe some problems with your methodology, or you'll miss some literature and so on and so on. Then you can give it to a scientist. You come from philosophy, give it to me. And I can just kind of catch maybe some basic things, scientific things that you don't see because, you live in this world and it's normal to you, but may not be understandable for me. And then give it to somebody who is not a scientist, who is, family member, just to read and catch the typing errors. That even if you did a spell check, you have from that was put in instead of form, which spelling checker would not recognize. So just give it to somebody who doesn't have to do anything with science, but will catch these simple things and simple illogical things that you may have written. Thank you very much.
Sevgili Maruf'ca teşekkür ediyoruz ve soru almadan zamanı yitirmeyelim. Hemen sevgili Pippa'yı davet edelim. Thanks, dear Maruf'c.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Dear Maruf'c, thanks for coming and informing us and welcome to Edirne and to our university. Previously you talked about writing together or writing as a single author a paper. Generally in social sciences it's not so common to see 4 people, 5 people coming together and writing a paper. And there is also a danger of getting the idea and then publishing another article that has the same idea. Would you recommend us, as an editor, would you prefer in social sciences, or would any editor that you know prefer single articles or co-authored ones?
I think it's up to the discipline, and again, you read the journal and see what the usual practice is. Nowadays, I mean, it's not only the problem of kind of stealing or theft of ideas, it's common everywhere. For example, when in medicine we started registering trials, so you have to register your trial, your study, before you enroll the first patient. And that, from a point of view of many small countries, was like, oh, somebody's going to steal this idea. Some company saying, oh, this is a cool thing to study, and we do it quicker because we have money. And that many researchers see it as a problem from smaller countries. It's okay, for big countries, for pharma industry, especially now you have in social sciences, there is a movement for pre-registration of your studies. You have Open Science Forum, which is a place where now I just, we applied for the World Conference of Research Integrity, and we were required to register our studies in this open forum. So anybody can come there and see your study. You're still working, and maybe somebody does it quicker than you. This is something that unfortunately happens, but it's all about, you should have trust in your co-authors, and you should have maybe a signed agreement that they're going to publish this study and that any future studies will be subject to new agreement. I mean, it is very difficult, but I think everything that you plan in advance and put it on paper is a safeguard that later on you can say, but look, this is what we agreed. And you can even take it up to court, because when you have a contract, it has a legal bind. I
think we'll be covering that a bit later.
Yeah. Okay, if you have any questions, come during the coffee break, during lunch. We'll be really happy to answer any specific question or give advice.
Only question. Thanks.
break? We got. Okay.
So, firstly, I would like to thank the translator for working so hard, and we're not giving the translator any break, so we're keeping going until lunchtime. So if anybody sees the translator at lunchtime, I think buy them a drink, because I think they deserve it. So I would like to thank the translators. Okay. So, my name is Pippa Smart. I'm the president of the European Association of Science Editors, and I also run training courses for editors and authors on how to publish and how to make journals more visible and higher quality. So this morning, what I wanted to talk about was following on from what Anna has spoken about, but particularly looking at how, as an author, you communicate with the peer reviewers and with the editors of the journal into which you want to publish. The most important thing, of course, is to get the submission right. So read the author guidelines, make sure what you're submitting fits in with the journal, and that you are submitting what the journal wants in the format that it wants. Make sure you submit the right version of the article. You might think this is silly, but trust me, I, as an editor, have received articles from authors, and halfway through review, get an email from the one author going, "I'm so sorry, I sent you the wrong version." So be very careful as authors that you keep a record of what version is the correct version and the most up-to-date one to submit. Also, when you submit, get the name of the journal correct. There is nothing makes an editor mad as getting an article saying, "Dear Pippa, I would like to submit my article for the Journal of the American Medical Association." What? That's not my journal. And this is very easy to do. If you submit your article to a journal, they reject it. So you take the article and you submit to another journal. So a word of advice, get the name of the journal right. Also, make sure you have all the information that you need when you start the submission process. And unfortunately, because of ethical problems, because of regulation problems, and because of the way that journals have changed in the last maybe 10 years, it's quite recent, journals are now asking for a lot more information on submission than they used to ask for. So previously, all they needed was the article and the list of authors, and that was it, easy. Now they need the ethics committee approval, they need a conflict of interest statement, they need full details of all the authors, including the ORCID, the unique author identifier numbers. In the references, you have to have all the links and the DOIs. They're asking for a lot more information. So again, you need to refer to the author guidelines to make sure you have all this information when you start the submission process. This journal, Diabetologia, used to have a really useful guide for authors written by the journal editor. Unfortunately, they have now removed it from the website because it's about 8 years old. But he makes many very important points. The first one, as Anna said, if you want to get your article published in a good journal, nothing will hide bad research. If your research is not good, there is no point submitting it to a good journal. You might get lucky, they might accept it, but nothing hides bad research. That's the most important thing. But on top of that, journal editors are looking for a message. There is no point doing what we call busy work. You should do research to answer a question. So what question has led you to do your research and write the article? Is the question, for example, what affects tourism in Mediterranean countries? Is the question, what is the effect of giving aspirin as a drug for people with autoimmune diseases. The question can be, what is it that the history of the Balkans tells us about our current economic status? So you need to think what the question is you're trying to answer, and you need to make sure that is conveyed to the journal editor, because that gives a reason for publishing that article and that research. Show your paper to colleagues before you submit it, because all of us, when we write something, firstly, we know what we've written, so we don't read it properly, because we know what we meant to write, and therefore when we read it, that is what we read. Your colleagues, though, don't know that, and so they will come at your article to read it fresh, and so they'll be able to say, I don't understand what you're talking about. Read it again. So do make sure somebody that is not involved in your research has read that article before you submit it. Your wife, your husband might be a good person to do this. Maybe your mother. So get someone to read it. The comment about figures. People do like looking at figures. They like images. And a lot of people will not read an article, they will just look at the figures. Now that's fine in some disciplines where you have lots of figures. My journal is Learned Publishing. We publish a lot of bibliometric articles and a lot of articles discussing publishing. And our subject does not lend itself to pretty pictures. Does anyone here publish in botany or plant science? Is anybody here? Because that is the journal I want to edit, because they get lots of pretty pictures of flowers. And so they have lots of nice images, but in our area we don't have pictures. So if you can get images, they're very good for breaking up an article and making it attractive to readers, to make them come in and want to read it, but it's not always possible. And finally, revise your article by 25%, which is a lot. And I'll talk about this more after lunch when I'm talking about how to write an article. But remember this 25%. The letter to the editor, so your first communication with the editor. Not all journals ask for a letter to the editor, and some specifically say we do not want a letter. But if they do, think about your communication, because this is the first time that you are speaking to the editor. So the first thing is, don't promise more than you are delivering. Don't write in that letter that this is probably the best article that that editor is ever going to receive, because that editor might disagree with you. So be careful with what you promise to the editor. Don't make the editors very long. Sorry, the letters. Don't make the letters very long. Editors are short of time. What they want is a quick introduction to the article. So don't make it very long. Get the name of the journal right. I might mention that a few times. And I might mention it because my journal is in direct competition with another journal, and I quite often get articles submitted to me that have the other journal's name. So I know the other journal has rejected them, and then they've been sent to me. So, items to include in your letter to the editor. Sometimes it's good to include background for why the research was done. And particularly this comes into the arts and humanities and the social science area. So the idea for the research project might have come from a conference or a meeting or a specific news item or a new development, perhaps in politics or in economics. So that's quite a nice link to say this is why the research question arose. So that might make the editor more interested in where this has come from. And it's not always possible. Briefly discuss what's in the article, but be very brief. Think of this as almost shorter than the abstract. Maybe 100 words maximum. Very quickly say this is what the article is about. And then also what is new? What are you bringing that is new to what is known? So what is it? Why should the editor be interested in this article? Because remember, this is the letter of invitation to the editor to say, look at my article favourably because it's got good stuff in it. So you want to bring the editor in. And also, why did you select this journal? What makes this journal a suitable platform for your research, for your article? And this is also very important because it helps you as authors to think, why did I submit to this journal? Also, as a tip, do not say because you have a high impact factor. A good thing is to say because your journal publishes in this subject area, because you have already published these articles, which my article is associated with, because your journal is very highly read in this region, and therefore my article would be suitable for readers in this region. So it makes you think about what makes that journal the right journal for your article, and put that in the letter, again, to help the journal editor to make a decision first cut. So what do editors want? Well, they're not all experts in all areas. So as an author, you're trying to, in that author's letter, in the title of the article, you're trying to intrigue the editor to make them interested in your article. So it's that first invitation is really important. This book, also called What Editors Want, I highly recommend it. Again, like Anna, I have no personal interest in this. I know Philippa Benson, but it's a very useful book on how to get published by looking at what the editors are actually looking for. So what happens next? You have submitted your article, you have the journal name correct, you've filled in all the submission information, and what happens after this? Now, if you work on a journal, or you're a journal editor, you assume that everybody knows what happens next. But for a lot of authors, it's hidden. They don't know what happens. They submit an article, and then you wait, and you think, well, what are they doing with my article for all this time? So I just thought I'd put some slides together. Most of this, I think, will be familiar to you all. But you also need to think of this in terms of barriers. So your first barrier, you submit your article, it will go to the editorial office, where there is a managing editor or administrative assistant, and their job is to see whether that article is suitable for the journal the very first time. They're looking at, is it in the right subject area, very broadly. So if you're a medical journal and they receive an article about the history of the English language, for example, they will know it's instant reject because it's nothing to do with that journal. But they'll also be doing administrative checks. So does the article have the references? Does it have figures? Has it filled out all the right parts of the submission system? And they can make an immediate or a desk reject at that point. So this is the first hurdle. Do you have everything in that article ready for that submission? Assuming it's okay, they then pass the article to the editor. That's the editor, that poor person surrounded by piles of articles. So the editor gets to see the article. This is normally either the editor-in-chief or the senior editor working. And that editor will also have a quick look at the article to decide whether it's worth considering or whether it should be rejected. Now, I have to warn you, most editors will not spend a lot of time at this stage. I give each article about 10 minutes. So it's really quick. And but it's not rejecting the article, it's saying, is this worth considering? And there might be many reasons why I think an article is not worth considering. It might be because it's not in the scope of my journal, so I'll reject it. It might be because within 10 minutes I can tell it's so badly written, we won't be able to evaluate the content of it, so I'll reject it. I might look at it and go, it's on a subject that we've published so many articles on this subject that I don't think we need any more articles on this topic, and I'll reject it. Unfair on authors, but that is one of the decisions an editor will make. So I'll reject it. Or maybe I'll look at the article and I'll think there's lots of things that are suspicious about this article, and I might do a plagiarism check, and that might make me reject it. So there are several reasons for rejection at this point, but these are superficial evaluation. I'm not looking in depth at the article. I'm making a decision based on obvious problems with the article. If it's suitable for consideration, either the editor will send it directly to the reviewers, or will send the article to one of the handling editors, an associate editor, deputy editor. They have different names in different journals. And it's their responsibility to find the reviewers and send out for review. When the review reports come back, again, they follow the same trail back, and the decision is made. In some journals, the associate editors make the decision, and in some journals, it's the editor-in-chief or the main editor. Journals work different ways. In some journals, the associate editor makes a decision, but that has to be ratified by the editor. In other journals, the editor doesn't even see the articles at this point. They go directly, once the associate editor has made a decision, the decision goes immediately to the authors. So journals work different ways. The journal, the Annals of Botany, rejects about 95% of all submissions. And the editor-in-chief, it's a very big journal. The editor-in-chief never gets to see an article where the associate editor has decided to accept. He only sees the articles which the associate editor has decided to reject. And the reason for that is that their authors are very argumentative. So a lot of their authors will appeal against the rejection. So he only sees the rejected articles so that he can make sure he knows why they're rejected. So if the author comes back, he knows exactly the reason, and he agrees with the reason. Other editors will only see the accepted articles. So journals work slightly different ways according to their own internal structure. So when a decision goes back to an author, the basic 5 decisions are reject, reject with reconsider. This is when an editor will go back and say, there are big problems with your article, so I'm rejecting it because there are big problems. But your research is interesting, there is good things in your article, but you need to completely rework it. So if you are prepared to completely rework it, and that might mean some new experiments, some new research, some new literature searches, then I would welcome this as a new article, totally new submission. The reject means go away and do not come back. Reject, reconsider means I will reconsider this if you completely redo it. So that sometimes is worth considering. And then you have major or minor revision, and then accept. The difference between major and minor revision is not clear. Journals work different ways. In our journal, a major revision means that when the article comes back, we will be sending it out for review again. So we consider the changes to be so substantial, we would want external reviewers to check them again. Minor revision for us means that when the changes are made, we as internal editors can make the decision. It is not a reflection of the amount of work we're asking the authors to do. It's the type of work we're asking them to do. So we might say to some authors, you need to almost rewrite your article because the language is so bad, but the content of it is absolutely fine. But the language needs a lot of work. And for us, that would be minor revision, but for the authors, that might feel like huge revision because you have to rewrite it. But for us, that's minor because we can check the language when it comes back. But if we're asking for new experiments and new work and some new discussions, that we would probably want to send out to reviewers again, so we would count that as major. For other journals, they have different criteria between major and minor. So there are, there are variations. Journals are all very different. And then, of course, there is accept. Just as a note, there are a few journals. One I know is all of the Lancet journals. When they accept an article, it is a provisional acceptance. What they say is, we accept your article subject to our internal copy editors evaluating the article and making sure there are no problems with it. And they still get some articles that are rejected after their provisional acceptance, because the copy editors, who are in-house staff, have discovered some problems. And with them, it's particularly statistical analyses that have been missed by the reviewers and the editors that are picked up in the editing stage. So if you've had an article accepted, sometimes there might be problems later on, if some big problem is identified later on. So these are not legal contracts. These are agreements to publish, subject to there being no problem identified later. So what are the reviewers asked to do? Well, the reviewers are asked to check the quality of the content, the methodology, the references, the conclusions, to use their expert knowledge to evaluate the article and check if it's okay. But they are human, and will miss a lot of things depending on how busy they are and how interested they are in the article. So if a reviewer is bored by your article, they won't read it properly, and they are more likely to make a negative recommendation than a reviewer that finds your article interesting and stimulating. So again, you need to think of this when you're writing an article, which we'll talk about this afternoon. So editors are human. We all make mistakes. We are flawed, we're biased, and we're opinionated. And I include myself in all of that. A good editor is aware of these problems and tries to avoid them, but editors, unfortunately, are human beings, and they all have their own good and bad things. Editors want their journal to be the best, so they want the best, the most exciting research. And that's why in your communication with an editor, you should not promise too much, but you must make sure you sell your article to an editor, that you're actually highlighting the really interesting things that you're saying to an editor. And reviewers also, they are you. You are the reviewers. And you know yourself, when you read submissions even from your students, or if you're asked to review articles, sometimes you're very tired, you've had a very long day. Other times you're on a train journey, you've got plenty of time, and you're really interested in what you're reading. So it's not fair, but it means that you can get good and bad reviews. And the system is not completely fair. Last night we were talking about using AI technology as a better way of reviewing and evaluating articles, because humans are flawed, and we're not always very good. But the important thing to remember is a quick decision is likely to be negative, because a general rule for all good journals is that you can take your time to accept an article, but if you're going to reject, you must reject quickly, to allow that author to take their research and move on with it, do something else. There is nothing worse for an author than waiting for 12 months only for their article to be rejected. If they wait for 12 months and then it's accepted, at least it's accepted at the end. So who selects the reviewers? Some journals allow authors to suggest reviewers. And if they do, it's a good idea to make some recommendations. Equally, some journals will allow you to name people that you do not want to review your article. But whether you are recommending or saying you don't want somebody, you should give a reason. And here are just two example reasons. I'm recommending Professor X because we're working in the same field. We used to work together, so be open about this, but we don't work together now. But Professor Y, I do not want him to review my article because he's working in a competing laboratory. And if you tell an editor this, the editor may still choose to use the reviewer you say you don't want to, but if you've given the editor the reason, then that gives the editor better information on which to base their decisions. So how long does it take? This was a case of plug in some numbers, because it's impossible to tell how long it will take for an article to go through the process. The very first step, to get past the editorial office, if your article arrives at the right time of day, it can be dealt with in 10 minutes, in half an hour. But if people are on holiday or sick, or they're very busy, or they've got a big workload, it can take longer. So it should take between 1 day and 1 week for it to pass that first stage. Then it needs to get past the editor and the associate editors, and again, depending on their workload, between 1 day and 2 weeks. This is ideal. It should take no longer than 2 weeks. The reviewers. This is where time extends almost indefinitely. You ask a reviewer normally to review within 3 weeks, or 2-3 weeks is common. So you give the reviewer 1 week to say they accept the invitation or they don't. And then if they say they accept, you give them 2 or 3 weeks. So you would assume that you get all the reviewer reports within maybe 4 weeks. But it doesn't work that way. Because so if I invite Anna to review an article, after 1 week, Anna comes back and she says, yes. I said, great. So she gets the article. 1 week later, she comes back and says, oh, I'm really sorry, but I've now got a huge job, so I can't review anymore. So I say, okay. So I then have to start with somebody else. So I invite someone else, and they say yes. Most journals, international standards say that for original research articles, you should receive 2 reviewer reports. However, reviewer research says that on global average, it takes, you need to invite 2.4 reviewers to get 1 review. And you don't want to invite 100 people in the hope that you get 2 reviews. So normally you would invite maybe 3 or 4 people in the hope that you would get 2 reviews. But if they all say no, then you need to invite 4 more. And so this time period can get longer and longer. The longest one I've experienced on my journal was a very niche article. And it took me 6 months to get anybody to agree to review. Because I kept asking people, and they'd say, not in my area, so I'd ask someone else. I asked, I think it was 30 people to review before I got 2 people to agree. And so it took a long time. Another article took about 3 months, and I had to go back to the author to say, I just cannot find anyone to review your article. Can you make some suggestions? So the author made some suggestions of reviewers, which we did use, and sadly, they recommended reject. So the reviewing assistant process can take a long time. The other problem you have is you invite a reviewer, they say yes, you expect the review in 2 weeks' time. In 2 weeks, you send a reminder email. In 3 weeks, you send another reminder email. In 4 weeks, you send another reminder email, and then you have to give up and you start talking to someone else. So it's very difficult. I was with a journal from the BMJ group. So the BMJ, very well-known publishers, they have very high-profile journals. And they've got one journal which is fairly new. And they have to invite 17 people, 17 people to get 2 reviews on average, because they're in an area where they just have real problems getting reviewers. So that process can really delay things. So then you need to get back that. And then the average time for submission decision varies enormously. This is a useful website. Take it as an average, and averages, as you know, are not always everybody's experience because you get outliers. But Anna Sharman has put together a list of journals. Now, I believe these are nearly all medical and life sciences journals. Social sciences and humanities journals tend to take longer through the reviewing process. And it's partly due to the nature of the articles and also, I think, just the culture of the subject. So these times are between 10 and 28 days, but I would say they're normally longer. And social sciences journals are normally about 3 months, 4 months to get a first decision. So you've got your decision, and of course it's not accept, because it never is accept, not at the beginning, it's nearly always some revision. So this is the hardest part, because you think as an author that you've already done all the hard work to write your article until you get the reviewer reports. Because now you've got people that are picking at your article and finding things wrong with it that you thought were fine, and people have misunderstood what you've written, and there are lots of problems. So, read the decision carefully, and read the whole decision. Read all the reviewer reports before you do anything. That's very important. Then you need to take a breath. Then you need to make a cup of tea. And take another breath. And then when you've done that, you can look at revision. So the first thing is reread your article when you get back any reviewer reports, because with distance, so you have submitted your article maybe several months ago, so reread your article again, fresh. Then look at the comments that are made about it, and at this point, don't type anything, just read. Read the article, read the comments, and think about them. And the reason for saying this is, if you have a personality like mine, you will rush straight in, and you'll start making corrections. And if you're like me, you will misread what the reviewers have said, and you'll misunderstand some of what the reviewers have said. And hopefully you're not like me, but I know with my articles, I have a tendency to read things wrongly. So read it carefully, think about what they're saying. Now, one important thing to remember, and more experienced authors are obviously much more knowledgeable about this, but junior authors do struggle. You do not have to change everything that the reviewers and the editors tell you to change. It is your article. However, you must take everything that they say seriously. So you must seriously consider everything they say, but it's your right to disagree with them. You need to remember, of course, if you disagree, that might mean that your article is not published, but not necessarily. It might be okay, because the reviewer might have misunderstood what you said. The editor might have misunderstood your discussion or your results. And so don't feel obliged to make every change. Again, you must have a good reason for ignoring challenges. Different methods of dealing with this, either, and these are just some personal examples, either group and prioritize the comments. So think, what are the most important changes I need to make, or the most time-consuming? So if, for example, you have 2 pages of reviewer comments, and one review says you need to do the literature research all over again, that's a very big job. So you might want to prioritize that first before you look at the rest. So prioritize them according to their importance and also their amount of work. Alternatively, you can walk through the article section by section. And so look at the introduction and change that, then look at the methods and change that, then look at the discussion and change that. So working through, a key thing is always use track changes as you're going through your article, so you know what changes you've made. And that's very important because you'll quite often want to go round. And also, if you're working with co-authors, you need to ensure that your co-authors also agree with any changes that you make. So this is an example of an article I've recently, for my journal, that I've recently received. And this is just to show you, this has come back from the author, and this is minor revision. And the author has rewritten some bits, so I can see what he's done. But also that big block in the middle is the author has responded to one of the comments of the reviewer to say, I disagree with you. You've said this, but actually I disagree with you, and I think our results are showing this, and this is my reason why. So he's given a clear explanation in reply to the comment. If you want any training, and if you're training early career researchers on how to respond to review comments or how to review articles, this is a very good resource. Now, unfortunately, it's in biomedicine, so if you're not in the area, it's not quite as helpful. But BMC, for many of their journals, they have transparent reviewing. So when the article's published, there is a link in the article, and there you can see the full history of the article. So there you've got from the reviewer report, you've got the individual reviewer reports that you can read. Okay, so you've got the individual reviewer reports that you can read, and then the author comments on the reviewer reports. So this article was resubmitted and re-reviewed, and in fact, it was reviewed again further down. So as a reader, that might be useful, but if you're training somebody on how to review or how to respond, this is a very good resource because you can see how reviewers have been working. And this is an example from this paper of how the author responded to the reviewing comments. So they wrote to the editor, please find below our responses to the reviewer's questions. And then they cut and pasted all of the comments. So Q1, there are some quite useful methods, etc. And then A1 is the author's response. So the author has said, this is an excellent and important point. So they've responded very nicely to the reviewer comments. Now for the editors, of course, this feels like your author has not just made changes, but they've actually benefited from the review and they've improved the article. So to get a positive response from the author when they receive reviewer comments also makes the editor more likely to look upon your revision favourably, to be happier with your revision, because they feel that you as an author have actually appreciated the reviewer's comments and have improved your article in direct response to them. So the way you respond to reviewers' comments is an important part of your communication with the editor. And then finally on this, appeals. Everybody makes mistakes, and if you feel that a journal editor has wrongly rejected your article, you can appeal it. And all journal editors should appreciate appeals from authors, so long as they're based on good fact. And if you have a good reason, appeal a rejection by writing politely, by stating your case of why you think the article has been wrongly rejected. And also bear in mind, most editors will only let you appeal once. So you need to make a very good argument for why you think that journal has made the wrong decision. So be careful with what you write about it. But if you seriously feel that the journal has made a decision wrongly, that they have misunderstood the article, then you should appeal against it. And so long as you're polite, that is actually good communication with a journal editor, to actually question them, because everybody makes mistakes. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. I have two questions. The first one is that what should the address of the authors in an article? Should it be the institutions in which these writers work just at the moment, or the address, or should it be the institution where the study was completed? And second, my second question is, as an editor, you got the review reports of two reviewers, but one of the reviewers wrote some nonsense things, or he or she wanted some unrelated things from the author. As an editor, what should you do? A quite long time passed. You got review reports, but one of them is nonsense. So what should you do as an editor? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So there were two questions. The first question is, when, as authors, if you're working in a group of authors, what should your affiliation be? Should your affiliation be where you work or where the study was completed? Again, different disciplines have different rules, but the general understanding is it should be where the research was completed. So if I'm working in Oxford University and I do a research study, but I then move to Cambridge, my affiliation should be Oxford, but normally in the acknowledgements I would say now currently working at. So you would put something in the article, but the affiliation should be, because the institution that supported the research should receive the credit for the research. And that's the argument for it coming from the research, where the research was done. The second question was how to deal with conflicting and unhelpful reviews. If I had a perfect answer, I would be a millionaire. Yeah, some reviewers are rude, nasty, vicious, unhelpful, and that was only the review reports I had last week. So they can be unhelpful. Now, an editor's job, when you send the reviewer reports back to the authors, it is unethical for an editor to change the reviewer reports. However, if they contain anything which is unhelpful, the editor should remove it. And in fact, I had one article where I had two reviewer reports, and one was just unpleasant. So when it went back to the author, it went back with reviewer report 1, all the feedback, and reviewer report 2, I deleted it, and I said, I have deleted this because the reviewer did not provide any helpful comment. And I left it as that. So an editor should remove anything that is unpleasant or unhelpful, because a review should be constructive. Even if you think the research is terrible, you should say to the author something positive. So, thank you for undertaking this research. However, unfortunately, your methodology was not suitable and you really should reevaluate this for your future work. It's nicer than saying, this is rubbish. So a reviewer should be positive, but when they're not, it should be deleted.
Hello. I think all of us have enjoyed your lecture, your presentation, but there is an ocean of questions, of course. But I would like to focus only on one of them. You know, the tendency to tend to involve in the review process the so-called blind or eventually double-blind reviewing. Something about it is appreciated. Yes.
It's interesting. Again, journals have different methods of peer review. The most common is double-blind, so the reviewers do not know the identity of the authors, and the authors don't know the identity of the reviewers, although anyone can guess. And sometimes you can guess who the author is, and the authors can guess the reviewers. That's the most common system because it seemed to be the most unbiased system. However, several journals are promoting a more transparent and open system whereby the reviewers are told the identity of the author and the authors are then told the names of the people that reviewed for them. And the system I showed you on the screen, that is an open system because the reviewers' names are disclosed to the authors and they're also published with the article. It's very much to do with your community. So in my area, we offer optional open-closed. So the authors are allowed to blind their article, so the reviewers don't know who they are, or they can put their names in the article. We leave it to the authors. And the reviewers are encouraged to put their name at the end of their review, but if they don't, then the author is not told who reviewed the article. And that works well in our community. We have about 70% of authors reveal their name and about 50% of reviewers. But it's very much in your community, and I know in small research areas, people feel it's better to have double blind, so nobody knows the identity and nobody can be accused of bias, because they may not be biased, but they can be accused of bias. So often that seems to be the most suitable in smaller research communities.
Thank you for the presentation. I want to just share the story of my manuscript. We submitted it July 2017 and worked nearly 7 months, authors and reviewers, because we got major revision and we worked on it, then we resubmit. Then we got a minor revision decision, and we worked again and resubmitted. And at the end of the 8 months, editor sent us a rejection letter with a different reviewer, not the reviewers who evaluated to these 8 months and wrote their letters, evaluation notes, and we answered. And that review report also was not evidence was not enough for the rejection. What do you think? How do others, I think it's not something wrongly, but I really sometimes, it's the second in my whole other life, such a case I faced it, and there is no way to how can I say, struggle with these situations. What do you advise or recommend? Thank you.
That's interesting. Some journals will always send the article back to the same reviewers that reviewed it the first time, and other journals will send it to new reviewers. The problem is, if you send it to new reviewers, they might discover something that the other reviewers had missed, which can lead to rejection. Unfortunately, if they've raised some reason, if the reviewers of the minor revision, so this latest round, if they've identified something that was missed earlier on, that can lead to rejection. And you can also get it. In fact, I have an article recently where the authors have gone through 3 revisions, and I've now rejected it. And we took, as a journal editor, we took this very seriously and we consulted amongst ourselves. But the authors had corrected what they were asked to correct, but they had then introduced some new things that were problems. And that had caused the rejection. And I think you need to look carefully at all the review comments. But the problem is, as I said, reviewers are human, and the early reviewers might have missed something that was picked up by the later reviewers. Some journals actively go to new reviewers, which can cause problems. But you can appeal. If you feel the decision was unjust, you can appeal. Or you can look at the article. You need to evaluate the article yourself and decide whether the decision made seems reasonable or not. But the time doesn't surprise me, unfortunately. I'm sorry. I'm aware I'm holding people from their lunch, which is very important. Perhaps should we have questions later?
Thank you very much for your great presentation. I would like us to ask a question about the language issue, which is really very important for us. Nearly all of us try to write scientific data in a language that is not our mother language. So when we send our articles to the journals, they mostly say that you have to check the language, you have to be careful about it. Then what we do is we take a professional help that costs some money for us. And when we take the article back from the professional help, we can see that what you call minor revisions on the article. And then we send it again. What we do is spend some money, which is important for all of us. I want to ask your limitations about this language issue as an editor. I mean, do you care this article is coming from a country which is not, which is English is not its mother language, or all articles must be in the same literate way? What is your limitations? Thank you.
Well, as an editor, I receive a lot of articles from China, and Chinese authors struggle with language a great deal. In our journal, our rule is that we try to look at the content because we can always sort out the language later on. And so we will try to focus on the content. If we can't understand the content because of the language, then the author needs to be, we reject it to say to the author, we can't understand what you're saying. So that's the bottom level, but we always try to look beyond the language, and we try to get to the point of acceptance before we say to the author, we've accepted the content, you now need language help, or we do it ourselves. We're a small journal, so we quite often re-edit and rewrite things within our editorial team. But we don't look at the country where the authors are coming from at all. When we're considering articles, and a good journal editor wouldn't. The problem is, as an author, you need to make sure that the message of your research is transmitted, and the most important part of your abstract is to make sure that that is good. And if you can get that across, then you can deal with language later on. And a good journal will look at content first, not at language. But editors are busy, and if you go to the very high-impact journals, because they're so busy, they're actively looking for reasons to reject you. So Nature rejects 97%, even PLOS ONE, which is a very big journal, they reject 50%. And so they're looking for reasons to reject, and language is one of them. So if you can try to get your message across clearly, then the language itself isn't so much of a problem, but it's the language of the message, of the results.
Teşekkürler. Başka soru sanıyorum yok. Her iki konuşmacıya da teşekkür ediyor ve öğle arasından sonra saat 14'te görüşmek üzere diyorum. Teşekkürler.